An alpha warrior excels in battle, and the king rewards him with his own lands where he meets his future wife. This is the story of Dias, an orphan who was recruited into the kingdom's army. Thanks to his exceptional combat skills and his achievements in the war, the king rewarded him with his own land. The only problem is, it's literally just land. There's nothing there. No buildings, no people, just grass. An incredible reward, right? Yeah, not really. This grassland is called Nezros, and from this day forward, the knight will be known as Dias Nezros, though he has no idea what he's actually supposed to do with it. He was simply sent here with his weapons, and his only assigned duties are to live there, protect his people, collect taxes, and hand them over to the king. After this, he goes to get water, and fortunately, the river water is clean, since during the war, he often had to drink muddy water. Despite walking quite a distance, he hasn't seen a single living creature, just endless grass that isn't even edible. Once night falls, he thinks about his options. If things don't improve, he plans to head to a village and find work that lets him help people, since that was his parents' final wish. He falls asleep this way, but at dawn, he's woken up by someone pounding on his shelter, a girl demanding to know who he is and what he's doing there. He answers that his name is Dias and that he's here because he has nowhere to sleep. His painfully serious answer makes the girl think he's an idiot, and Dias doesn't deny it, admitting he never received an education. She then asks about his goal, and he replies that he was sent here and his current objective is simply not to die. His blunt honesty makes her suspicious, so Dias clarifies further. He wants to fulfill his parents' dying wish and protect the weak. That's his only goal. At that moment, the girl's horn begins to glow, apparently because Dias is telling the truth. She asks whether he's friend or foe, and he admits he doesn't know since he just met her. This irritates her, and she demands a clearer answer. Dias doesn't understand her frustration, but one thing becomes obvious to him. If this is his territory and she's one of his people, of course, she'd be upset not knowing who he is. So Dias declares that he is her ally, swearing to protect her no matter who she has to face. This makes her horn glow even more intensely. Dias still doesn't understand what's happening, but he's taken away without any explanation. Poor guy. Nobody tells him anything. He's brought to a village where everyone is stunned at the sight of him, while Dias himself can't believe he never noticed this place before. He's introduced to the tribe's leader, who asks the girl Alna whether she saw any red in the glow. Alna answers that it was an intense blue instead. Based on what she's heard, the leader asks Dias whether being Alna's ally also means being hers. He says yes, and that includes the whole village, explaining that the king ordered him to come to these lands to serve as their lord. Hearing this, Alna aims her bow at him. The leader tells her to lower it since she still wants to speak with Dias, and asks him to explain from the beginning how the king came to give him this order. Dias's story starts from his earliest memories, back when his parents were still alive. His mother always told him to find work that helps people, and his father told him to grow strong enough to defend the weak. These were their final wishes since both died in an epidemic, leaving Dias on his own at age 10. He banded together with other orphans, earning money by cleaning the city or hunting weak monsters. From then on, Dias lived his life trying to fulfill that last wish. At 15, war broke out, and enemy soldiers quickly reached a neighboring town. Without hesitation, he enlisted to defend everyone, and it was only then that he discovered his talent for combat, winning battle after battle. The war ended 20 years later, and at age 35, His Majesty granted him this territory. Having heard his story, the elderly leader acknowledges that he seems genuinely willing to protect his people. But she poses another question. What would he do if someone wasn't part of his people? Would he still consider them an ally? Dias answers that naturally they'd be neighbors sharing the same plains, so he would help them if they had problems. At that, the leader's horn begins to glow, and after nodding with a smile, Alna lowers her weapon. Confused by all this, Dias asks why they even asked him that, since he assumed anyone living there was already his people. But as he says this, something clicks. Seeing that he's figured it out, the leader confirms it. They are not his people. Quite the opposite. They are enemies of his king, having fought against his kingdom for many years. Hearing this, Dias falls into thought. Poor Dias dropped into hostile territory without knowing it. But then the leader raises the possibility that they might not be enemies after all. Since his glow was blue, a very unusual color, meaning they should be able to get along. She then asks him to look up and listen. She introduces herself as Mole, leader of the Oni tribe, who fought against his kingdom for a long time over control of these plains. She explains that 50 years ago, the Oni lost a major battle and were forced to flee the area. Dias asks how they're still living there if they fled. Mole reveals that by accumulating mana in their horns, they can cast various spells, including a concealment spell that lets them hide the entire village and erase all trace of their presence. Dias realizes this is why he was unable to find them the day before, but then asks whether it's really safe to tell someone from the enemy kingdom all this. Mole makes clear she wouldn't have told him if he weren't blue. She then reveals the existence of a spell called Soul Assessment, which produces 3 possible colors: Red signals danger or hostility, white means harmless, and blue represents someone who brings blessings. If the person lies even a little, the glow turns murky and shifts toward red. But that never happened with Diaz, not even once, which convinces her that he's an honest fool. It's an insult, sure, but a flattering one, and it's also surprising since she's never seen anyone else make it to his age while still following through on his parents' dying wish. Diaz decides to take it as a compliment, though he isn't entirely sure that's what it was. Mole notes that she has in fact been complimenting him for a while now. Setting the jokes aside, she tells him she'll give him her full support to become a great feudal lord. She clarifies that her people won't be his subjects, but they will offer him shelter, food, and even some livestock. In exchange, she asks that he tell no one about the village's existence, especially not the king. Diaz reassures her that he has nothing against them, and as long as they don't seek conflict with the kingdom, he has no problem with them living there. Mole then informs him that Alna will stay with him for a while to help him out, meaning they'll be living together while she teaches him how things work around here. Alna immediately starts protesting, asking what that's supposed to mean. Mole reminds her that she's the one who brought him here, so she needs to take responsibility. With no other option, Alna reluctantly agrees. We then see the two of them standing in front of his new house. Diaz is stunned that the other Oni had already nearly finished building it by the time they arrived. Alna explains that whenever a threat capable of breaking through the concealment spell gets close, they take their houses apart and flee, which is why they live in structures called yurts. Once the house is finished, Diaz and Alna sit down to talk, and she tells him food will be brought later, along with the BA. Confused. Diaz asks what that last thing is, and Alna explains it's livestock. She adds that if he breeds the pairs and grows the herd, he'll have a steady source of income. Diaz thanks her for the information, then asks if she could teach him how to grow his village. Alna's expression shifts, and she asks if he really thinks she'd know how to do that. She also questions why he'd even want subjects in his current state, since all he has is one yurt and food for himself. Visibly deflated, Diaz is then handed a sack of matabi powder by Alna, a substance that, when scattered around an area, attracts monsters. And depending on how many he catches, he can earn another yurt. So we see our protagonist standing out in the middle of nowhere. Once there, he dumps out the entire sack and soon hears a stampede of buffalo-like beasts approaching without any fear. Diaz raises his axe and starts cutting them down. Here we learn that his fighting style basically amounts to following his instincts and swinging his axe as hard as possible. After wiping out the stampede, he's disappointed that he only managed to catch about half the herd, but then realizes a bigger problem. He has no way to carry that many back at once. Later that afternoon, as he returns carrying one buffalo, he worries that Alna will scold him again for fighting recklessly without thinking about transportation. Yeah, he's kind of an idiot when he arrives. Alna is shocked that his very first hunt yielded a black gi. Diaz tells her he actually killed far more than that, but had no way to bring them all back. Almost alarmed, she asks how many he killed, and he reveals it was somewhere between 30 and 40. A number that's almost unheard of. With this, Diaz earns real respect from both Alna and the tribe's leader. Having proven his manliness, the men are called to go retrieve all the Gii Diaz hunted, and this is the first time Alna refers to him by name. Diaz asks the leader what exactly manliness means, and she explains it's a man's worth measured by his ability to work and provide. Diaz understands somewhat, but asks what that has to do with Alna's good mood. The leader explains that, as an adult woman, it's only natural she'd be pleased by such displays of manliness. Diaz then asks if that also makes him more attractive, even without looks or charm. The leader tells him that's nonsense. Beauty doesn't put food on the table. And honestly, what a statement. Anything unrelated to manliness holds no value to the women of the tribe. Since Alna is both beautiful and hardworking, the greatest gift she could offer would be to marry him. A nervous Diaz replies that he has no such intentions. The next day, he wakes up to find that Alna made him breakfast. He compliments how delicious it is, which makes her blush, and he ends up blushing too out of reflex. Changing the subject, Alna asks what he plans to hunt today. Even though he brought back a huge amount of food yesterday, he'll need a well and a latrine if he wants to attract more people, since he won't be able to pay the people building the houses otherwise. Diaz considers going to hunt more black gi, but Alna suggests he shouldn't keep bringing back the same thing and recommends hunting monsters instead. Diaz points out that monster meat isn't edible due to the miasma, but their claws, horns, and magic stones are valuable. Alna mentions there aren't many monsters nearby, but she can locate them using magic, and suggests they hunt together. At first, Diaz refuses, saying it's too dangerous, but Alna wins him over with her enthusiasm. Later, we see Diaz grooming the Bia, since their wool is worth more than their meat. That's when the men arrive with the supplies he requested, and unlike before, they approach him cheerfully thanks to his impressive display of manliness. Alna then steps out of the house dressed differently, surprising everyone with how different she looks, and leaves the Bia in the men's care so she can spend the whole day with Diaz. Yeah, that's definitely a jealousy trigger. Dias immediately feels the hateful stares from the other men and asks that they head out to hunt as soon as possible. They arrive at a rocky area, and Dias asks if this is really the right spot. Alna tells him not to worry, since she'll handle the search. She casts a spell, and after a few seconds detects the presence of a fairly large monster in the distance. Worried for her safety, Dias asks her to wait there while he goes to check it out. Alna reassures him, reminding him she can use concealment, and promises they'll flee together if it turns out to be too strong. Though hesitant, Dias agrees when he reaches the monster. Alna is stunned to realize it's an earth dragon. Dias, however, just sees it as an oversized turtle and goes to strike it. When he does, his weapon cracks, revealing just how tough its shell is. He goes for its head, but the creature retreats into its shell, protecting its weak points. From a distance, Alna screams at him to flee immediately, but Dias refuses and climbs back onto the shell to keep attacking. After a long stretch of relentless strikes, his axe cracks further. But this isn't really a problem, since Dias immediately repairs it. Alna is amazed by this. Dias explains that he obtained this axe after defeating a shogun from a neighboring country, and that beyond its lion-like shape, it can repair minor damage whenever he wills it. He keeps attacking the creature until he's fairly worn out. When he turns to check on Alna, he sees she's been affected by the monster's miasma. Worried for her safety, he considers heading back, so he delivers one final blow, and this time he actually manages to break through the shell. The dragon reveals itself and charges up a fireball, but Dias stops it by slicing through part of its neck. He then dodges the monster's attacks until suddenly one of its fireballs strikes toward Alna, revealing that she was its actual target. Dias immediately leaps in, remembering the vow he made to protect her, and uses everything he has to finish off the creature. After defeating the massive beast, Alna runs to Dias in tears and embraces him, and in his arms she tells him she'll marry him. The riding party arrives at the fight scene. Two villagers sent by the leader who wanted them to track down the couple since it was getting late, only to walk in on the marriage proposal. After this, everyone brings the Earth Dragon back, spreading the news that Dias defeated it. He downplays it, asking if it's really that big a deal, but Mole shows up to praise his impressive feat. Dias asks if this is enough to cover a well and a latrine, and the leader tells him that just one leg of the beast would be enough to build plenty more than that. In fact, the creature's value far exceeds anything the village could normally offer. In exchange, they can butcher the beast for him, and on top of that, provide the well, the latrine materials for a yurt, supplies, and medicinal herbs. All of that just from one dragon, which sounds perfect to Dias, until Mole mentions that the rest of the beast will serve as Alna's wedding gift. Dias freezes and asks what she means, and Mole simply repeats that he's getting married, whether he likes it or not. After all, having a neighbor capable of killing dragons is more than a little intimidating, so it's best to form strong ties. And this feat has more than proven his manliness. If he doesn't marry Alna, some other woman will come after him instead, which is essentially already happening. Regardless, Alna has already gone to talk to her parents, so he doesn't have much choice. Dias asks if they could at least leave it as an engagement for now, but the Oni aren't really used to that kind of arrangement. Still, he can choose when the wedding happens, and the sooner they solidify the bond, the easier it'll be for the tribe to support him as their lord. Dias asks why forming this bond matters so much to her, and she explains that a lord like him is rare. The previous one was a fool who died recently from illness. With that, she leaves, wishing him luck. Dias then asks some villagers how old Alna is, and learns she's 15 and already old enough to marry. Given the age gap, he could practically be her father, and back in the kingdom, the minimum marrying age was 18 anyway, so he decides they'll marry 3 years from now. Enough time for him to become a proper lord. While thinking this over, Alna arrives to tell him they've reached an agreement and asks what he'd like to eat. He tells her whatever she wants, and just like that, he finds himself in front of a huge buffet with the whole family gathered. Everyone is thrilled about the fine man Alna found, while Dias keeps insisting it's just an engagement. A few days later, we learn the protagonist now has 4 wells and a latrine, meaning he can finally start taking in more people. The big question now is where he's supposed to find those people, right? When Alna shows up to report that she's detected a monster to the north. It's not particularly large, but it's heading their way, so Dias decides to eliminate it before it arrives, and naturally, Alna wants to come too. They're worried the BA might get scared and run off, so some villagers arrive just in time to be left in charge of watching them. The monster turns out to be an ogre. Alna suggests letting it pass, but since it's heading straight for them, they have no real choice. Both of them charge toward it. Alna fires an arrow while Dias closes the distance, but the creature proves surprisingly agile. Alna manages to pin its foot down with an arrow, letting Dias catch up and finish it off. Once the monster is dead, Alna goes to congratulate him, but while talking, she catches the disgusting stench coming off him and sends him to bathe and clean his armor. The next day, Dias is thinking back on everything that happened, wondering how he's supposed to attract more subjects, when Alna shows up with good news. Francis is pregnant. Hearing this, he rushes to the pen to congratulate the little one, though this makes Francis jealous, so he ends up joining in too. Alna mentions that not not everything about this is good news. She reminds him that the BE are quite intelligent and understand human speech, which makes them emotionally sensitive during pregnancy to the point where fear alone can overwhelm and kill them. To prevent that, the strongest member of the herd needs to stay close by, meaning both BA will need to sleep in the yurt, which will inevitably make it dirty and smelly. She mentions that some men can't stand that at all. After hearing all this, DS tells her it's not a problem, since both BA are an important part of his family. Touched by his big heart, Alna happily calls him the best husband. At that point, the Bia start talking with Alna, who blushes and insists they haven't done anything yet. DS understands exactly what they're implying and just covers his face. Right then, Alna's horn starts glowing. She tells DS that there are humans on horseback nearby. DS decides to go take a look and asks her to use concealment. On the way there, he wonders whether they might be enemies, in which case he'll need to be careful until a knight recognizes him. And DS realizes it's Klaus. Both are happy to see each other, and Dias asks what brings him out here. Klaus explains he came as an escort for a young lady who apparently has business with him. Dias doesn't recognize her, and Klaus asks if they could rest at his estate. So they head to his humble little house. Dias explains that he had the village concealed except for his own home in order to protect the Oni's secret without having to explain anything. The young lady thanks him for taking them in and introduces herself as the third princess, Diane, asking whether his estate is still under construction, since she doesn't see any servants either. Dias, quite casually, calls her by her first name, which infuriates one of the guards for not addressing her properly as Your Highness. Diane, however, says she's fine with it. Dias explains that this house is literally all he has, and that he worked hard just to build it, which surprises Diane. She asks what happened to the construction workers since the king was supposedly supposed to provide him a reward and funds to get settled. Dias tells her he never received a single coin. He was simply dropped off here with no water and no food. Everyone is shocked to hear this, and Klaus is furious. Dias then asks what business brought them all the way out here, forcing her to travel for a full month. Diane explains it's about the war. Rumors are spreading in the capital about a new conflict breaking out, and she came to ask Dias for help since he's the hero who once saved the kingdom. As a reward, she offers her hand in marriage or that of Prinesia or Meralda, the guards accompanying her. Dias, however, has zero interest in any of this. He's perfectly content with his Bia. Marrying a stranger doesn't appeal to him either, and he flatly states he has no intention of returning to any war. He also can't send troops, since, as she can clearly see, he doesn't even have servants. Annoyed, Diane asks him to reconsider, but he gives a firm no. The guard from earlier stands up, furious at his disrespect, but when he draws his sword, Dias shatters it, leaving the poor man's hand completely numb. With nothing left to say, Dias tells them to leave. Klaus immediately agrees, knowing full well no one could ever hope to defeat the kingdom's great hero. Diane storms off, absolutely furious. Dias stays behind in the yurt, worrying about how he's going to fix the hole in the ground. Certain Alna is going to scold him for it. Meanwhile, Diane seethes over having been rejected, swearing that he'll regret it someday. As Dias watches them leave, Alna appears beside him, mentioning that one of the soldiers glowed an intense blue, while the rest were red and white. Surprised that she appeared out of nowhere, he asks how long she's been there, and she explains that since Francis seemed sad, they came over using concealment. Hearing this, Dias pets the BA as an apology, which makes Alna jealous, so he gives her some affection too. He then asks whether the red glow on the others meant they were hostile toward him. Alna says no now that she thinks about it. She feels the same way about both Francis and Frangua, since they're family too. Dias doesn't argue and agrees with her, though he privately wonders if the intensely blue soldier might have been Klaus. Alna then asks what he plans to do about the hole in the ground. Dias apologizes and promises to fix it. The next day, he wakes up as usual and finds Alna making breakfast. Suddenly, her horn starts glowing, signaling another human's arrival. Dias goes to investigate with Alna and the BA tagging along. When they arrive, they find Klaus, dressed quite differently this time. Dias asks what happened to his armor, and Klaus explains he got discharged from the army. Dias asks if it was his fault, and Klaus says no, he actually got himself discharged on purpose. Now he's here because he wants to work for Dias as a soldier. Dias considers accepting, since Klaus is someone he can trust in battle, but he still checks with Alna first. She appears from behind and says she has no objections. After all, his color has stayed blue this entire time. With Alna's approval, Dias agrees to take him on, but first asks Klaus to come back to the house with him, and that's how Dias landed his very first subject. Days pass, and we find Klaus in the middle of training. He tells us that over the 10 days he's spent here, he learned to build a yurt with Dias's help, and was even given equipment made from dragon materials, something even royalty couldn't easily get their hands on. Because of this, he promises he'll live up to expectations. What a solid guy, Klaus. That evening, the three of them enjoy a meal made by Alna. After the first bite, Klaus remarks on how delicious it is, declaring that Alna will make an excellent wife. Hearing this makes our protagonist nervous, while Alna simply offers him more food. While they're chatting comfortably with Klaus promising to give his best as captain, Alna's horn suddenly begins blowing. Dias immediately asks how many there are. Alna answers 12, coming from the east, all human except one who seems extremely weak. Dias decides to head out with Alna and the BA, leaving Klaus behind as protector, who watches in amazement as they all vanish using that magic. As he waits, Klaus recalls that the royal capital lies in that direction, and that right now the 5 princes and princesses are locked in a succession struggle, with the fallout from their scheming reaching even the borderlands, meaning it's only a matter of time before that conflict spills into these territories too. After a while, Dias returns with several elderly women, and everyone pitches in to help care for them. Once their needs are handled, Klaus asks what happened. Dias explains that due to a rebellion in a neighboring domain, the elderly were cast out simply to reduce the number of mouths to feed. What a bunch of monsters. Klaus immediately assumes Kazdex was behind it, since on the way he noticed just how terrible their condition was. Dias sets that aside for now and mentions that Grandma Maya is the leader of the group, and that thanks to her divination abilities, they were able to find their way here. Dias is overjoyed since he now has more subjects and immediately gets to work preparing yurts for them. Klaus isn't fully on board with this at first, but after a few words from Alna, he reconsiders, remembering a night during an enemy attack when Dias was the only one who stayed behind to protect the civilian refugees. Despite the danger, Dias saved a child and left him with the other refugees, swearing he'd protect him no matter what, even as enemies closed in on all sides. The only instruction Dias gave Klaus that night was simple: don't die, and Klaus followed it to the letter. He doesn't remember much else from that night. His only thought was to save as many people as possible and give Dias his full support. The battle didn't end until dawn broke, and they managed to protect the refuge. Remembering this, Klaus realizes Dias hasn't changed a bit, and resolves to keep supporting him in becoming a great lord. With that resolved, they managed to build several latrines and a hall where the women can work spinning wool. Now that they have far more people, Dias decides it's time to officially name this place a village, but nothing comes to mind. He doesn't want to use his own name, and he doesn't want anything that sounds too aggressive either. Alna suggests Iluk, meaning first village, and the name sticks. Honestly, not bad. What would you have named it? Tell me in the comments. Moving past that, once the meeting wraps up, everyone heads home, though they're still short on subjects. Dias brings up an idea Grandma Maya had, and right on cue she appears. Her idea was to sell off some of the dragon materials and use the money to buy slaves, but Dias despises slavery. During the war, he'd seen slaves forced into combat, all of them in horrific condition. So in his village, slavery is strictly forbidden. As it turns out, Grandma Maya hates slavery too. She only suggested it to test where Dias truly stood on the issue, since in Kazdex all anyone ever heard were cruel stories about it. She tells them that hunting slaves was literally a hobby for her former lord and his family. The second son had started the war and kept several slaves under his control, but Dias won't allow anything like that to happen in Iluk. On another day, Alna calls over a traveling merchant who apparently knows about the Oni village, except this merchant turns out to be a frog named Peijindo. Hope that's pronounced right. He explains he belongs to the frogman race. When Dias and Klaus first laid eyes on him, they were just as shocked as we probably are. But seeing that he's peaceful, they show him the materials anyway, which leaves Pejindu stunned as well. He asks if Dias really defeated the dragon alone. Sensing the doubt, Dias slices the dragon's shell clean in two to prove it. Pejindu is floored by this and immediately orders his men to start unloading the cargo. Once everything's unloaded, he tells them to bring out that as well, and his men reveal 2 small elf girls. Seeing this, Dias is instantly furious. Noticing that their eyes have lost the spark children should have, Alna calms him down, and together with the elderly woman, they tell Pejindu they have no interest in buying slaves. Realizing the misunderstanding, Pejindu clarifies that they aren't slaves. They're refugees he was forced to register as merchandise, since otherwise they would have died. He explains that in the village where the girls were born, twins are hated, believed to bring misfortune, and were meant to be executed right after birth. Their parents fled the village with them instead, but the strain proved too much, and both parents eventually fell ill. Before dying, they begged Pejindu to look after the girls. He initially refused, but when he was offered enough money to formally register them as cargo, he had no real choice but accept. Kneeling before Dias, he begs him to buy the girls, admitting he's deep in debt and has no way to keep supporting them. Alna confirms everything he's saying is true, and that both girls glow an intense blue, seeing they pose no threat. Dias agrees to take responsibility for them and offers to cover the cost of the materials used so far. Pejindu immediately closes the deal and heads off, leaving the girls in Dias's care. Dias picks them up and starts asking questions, including their names, but neither answers. He considers just giving them new names himself, which makes the girls cry out in protest. So he asks again, and this time the girl on the left reveals her name is Senai, while the other says she's Ihan. With that settled, Diaz sends them off to bathe with Alna. Watching how he handled the whole situation, Klaus remarks that it was honestly impressive. Diaz brushes it off, saying he's used to this kind of thing before the war. He practically acted as a father figure to other orphans. What a genuinely good guy. After their bath, Diaz notices the girls still don't fully trust him, but for now, just knowing their names is enough. Grandma Maya, however, senses that these girls aren't fully human and decides to keep a close eye on things going forward. Alna gives each sister a medallion, explaining that Sanai means beautiful as the moon, and that the medallions themselves are imbued with the moon's sacred power. Hearing this, the sisters break down crying, remembering how their parents used to call them by these names. Diaz tells them they've been incredibly strong and encourages them to cry as much as they need to. The Bia help comfort them as well. Diaz then asks Alna about the language behind the meaning of their names. She explains it's an ancient language that now only survives in legend, and admits she's starting to doubt the Oni are the only ones who still preserve it, meaning the girls' people may have had some connection to the Oni after all. From that day on, Iluk grew noticeably livelier. 10 days pass, and the sisters have grown much more comfortable when Alna suddenly senses someone approaching. Diaz heads out right away to check, leaving the sisters in the care of the BA, who they ask to hurry back soon. At the location, the visitor's glow is white. He introduces himself as Kamalat's servant of Eldan, the new lord of Kazdex, who wishes to arrange a meeting with Diaz. Agrees without hesitation, though he makes clear he won't allow someone like this man to set foot inside Iluk. Just then, he spots a young man arriving by carriage, accompanied by ladies-in-waiting, watching him with a distinctly malicious smile. That's where Alna mentions that Kazdex glows an intense blue, not quite as intense as Diaz's, but still bright, and that his soldier's glow is strong too. Suddenly, the young man steps down from his carriage and approaches to apologize to Diaz, explaining that he'd wanted to meet him in person since he's a genuine admirer of his. He introduces himself as Eldan of Kazdex. He's heard countless stories about Diaz and came here hoping the two of them could build a good relationship. Diaz is caught off guard by this and apologizes for how he treated Camelots earlier. Eldan waves it off and asks about the young woman who was with him, mentioning he was able to sense her presence through smell and hearing alone. Both of them are stunned that concealment failed to hide her, so Alna reveals herself. Seeing her horn, Eldan asks Diaz what race she belongs to, and Alna firmly answers that she's his wife. End of story. She's clearly not backing down on that one. Eldan then asks if she's a semi-human. Alna says she belongs to the Oni tribe and admits she doesn't know the term. Eldan explains that semi-humans are races with human-like traits, using the merchant Pajin Du as an example. Alna considers this and says she supposes she could be considered one. For some reason, Eldan starts crying and worriedly asks Diaz whether he's already had children with Alna. A nervous Diaz says no, though Alna cheerfully admits she wants 10. Yeah, this girl clearly has no limit. She also mentions that Diaz is raising 2 orphan girls who seem to be semi-human as well. This sends Eldan into full tears, and his body suddenly shifts into an elephant-like form as he cries out to his mother that he's finally found an ally. Right at that moment, though, Eldan collapses. They carry him to bed, and Diaz asks Camelots what happened. As it turns out, Eldan is only half semi-human, the son of a semi-human and a full human, meaning he can technically take either form, but shifting between them exhausts him tremendously. Semi-humans are already rare enough to see, and being one gives Eldan certain advantages, but not being able to stay in a single form causes him real problems. Because of this, his wives take great care of him, since he's especially prone to transforming when he gets emotional. Diaz tells him not to worry about it and asks about the rebellion. Eldan explains it was to protect his people. It all started with his birth. The previous lord, Enkar, already had a wife and a son, but that son turned out to be even worse than his father. So Enkar pushed him aside and chose Eldan instead, formally recognizing him as his son and granting him status and authority. Until he was 5, Eldan believed he was fully human, until the day he discovered the truth and learned that his mother was being treated as a slave. Camelots adds that from that point on, Lord Eldan and his mother began meeting in secret. Eldan dedicated himself to protecting semi-humans from the shadows. Camelots also reveals that Eldan's wives were originally slaves themselves, but Eldan saved them, and because of his ideals, they genuinely fell in love with him over time. Alna asks about a rumor she'd heard concerning him. Camelots explains that the rumor was deliberately fabricated, when in truth, all of them love each other sincerely. Alna is fascinated by this, but Camelots adds that keeping up the deception wasn't easy. Eventually, King Enkar found out, and immediately ordered the execution of every semi-human in the domain. Eldan included. In response, Eldan raised an army to protect his people and defeated him. Eldan apologizes for his earlier behavior, explaining he simply got overly emotional hearing that the family of the hero he admires so much includes semi-humans, and he assumed they'd naturally become comrades sharing the same dream. Before continuing, Diaz asks if by hero he means him. Eldan confirms it, recounting the story he's heard of the savior hero, Camelot's clarifies that the story tells of a man who honors his parents' final wish, helps the weak, single-handedly wipes out thousands of enemies, and reforms tyrannical nobles with his bare fists. Apparently, there's even a stage play based on it. Now, hearing all this, Daius is left speechless, fairly certain a good chunk of it must be exaggerated or outright invented. With all this said, Eldon once again asks that they build a strong relationship and work together toward creating a world where semi-humans can live freely. Daius affirms that he supports Eldon's dream, pointing out that in his own village, different peoples already coexist peacefully, and formally asks that they become allies. Hearing this from someone he idolizes, Eldon can't hold back and bursts into tears again. Later, the two catch each other up on the state of their respective domains, and when Eldon learns of Daius's interest in gaining more subjects, he recommends focusing first on building up food reserves since winter isn't far off, and failing to prepare now will cause serious problems later. Daius thanks him for the advice, and with that, the meeting wraps up. When they return home, both of them are greeted by the two girls, shouting and in tears, scolding them for taking so long and hitting them repeatedly out of sheer exhaustion and worry. That night, while the girls sleep, Alna talks with Daius about the twins' behavior, asking whether he should have scolded them for hitting him and stubbornly demanding to stay up late. Daius tells her that yes, technically he should have, but since he was the one who broke his promise to return on time, he felt it was only right that he apologize first. He adds that this is also just their way of testing adults they've only recently met, so he'll let it slide this time, since scolding them too harshly right now could end up spoiling them in the wrong way. Alna is happy to hear this, and the conversation shifts to the topic of food. Daius considers starting a garden since he used to work the fields before the war. Alna is about to say something on the topic when her horn starts glowing again. She senses several intruders nearby. Daius assumes they're bandits and decides to go check it out, with Alna joining him since finding them at night would otherwise be difficult. They leave Klaus in charge of watching the girls and head out together to investigate. At the scene, they find a group of men carrying torches. As it turns out, the man in the red hood had hired them, sending them out at night specifically to ambush Daius, since no one could hope to beat him in broad daylight, and if he ever noticed them coming, they'd already be as good as dead. The bandit leader dismisses this as exaggerated rumor, adding that with this many men, there's no way they could lose. The client gets irritated at his overconfidence, mentioning that if Eldon happens to be present, he'll pay 100 silver coins to whoever kills him and 10 gold coins for killing Daius. Thrilled by this, the leader tells his men to get ready, since they'll all be rich men by the time they get home. Just then, an arrow drops from the sky and strikes one of the men. Everyone ducks as more arrows start raining down. At the same time, they fire back toward the faint red glow they spotted, which flickers out briefly, but every arrow Alna fires finds its mark regardless. The leader orders his men to keep firing and hears someone groaning in pain nearby. They all move to surround the source, only for Daius to step out, sword drawn. No one can make sense of what's happening in the darkness, and as they scramble to regroup, Daius cuts through them effortlessly. The leader manages to spot the green glow coming from Alna's horn and bolts toward it, trying to pin down her location, but Daius appears right in front of him and slices through his sword. For just a moment, the man gets a clear look at him and recognizes him as Daius, muttering that facing a monster like this isn't even worth 100 gold coins. Cutting away, we see the man in the red hood fleeing through the forest, but just as he thinks he's escaped, a sharp searing pain shoots through his groin, making him scream out. He curses Daius's name for doing this to him. Turns out that in the past, this noble had abused his status to do something despicable, and an enraged Daius struck him there with everything he had. Just remembering it fills the man with fury, and he swears he'll kill Daius for it. Back with our protagonist after defeating the bandits, Daius lines them up, and as punishment, banishes them from his territory. As they watch the men leave, Alna asks if such a light punishment was really appropriate. Daius says yes after all, nobody was seriously hurt, though he admits that when that one arrow grazed him earlier, he felt a surge of real rage. Still, he notes that if something like this happens again, he won't hold back next time. Moving past that, Alna mentions that at least they walked away with decent loot, which can be melted down and turned into plenty of useful tools. On the way home, Alna shares that her family was never wealthy, so her dream had always been to take down a group of bandits just like tonight. Still, she finds it strange that bandits would even target this particular plane. She admits that when she first saw Daius arriving by carriage, she got excited, thinking he'd finally be the one to defeat the bandits, only for him to end up abandoned out in the open instead. When she came back to check on him the next morning, she found him sleeping peacefully like nothing had happened. She confesses that at first she'd actually considered killing him and taking his axe and armor for herself. Hearing this story, Daius is stunned. Alna wonders aloud why she ultimately decided to talk to him instead. She still doesn't fully know the answer, but she's grateful for it, since it led to the life she has now, so she doesn't think it was the wrong call. With that said, she uses her ability to turn invisible, sneaks up to Daius, and kisses him on the cheek, only to immediately turn bright red with embarrassment and dash off. Daius chases after her, admitting to us along the way that it's thanks to her that he's able to keep moving forward. After all, She's the one who lights up his darkness. One ordinary morning, Dias meets with Maul to tell her he wants to start growing a garden. He mentions he already discussed it with Alna, but she told him it simply isn't possible except in pots. Mol confirms this, revealing that for some reason, crops just don't grow on these plains. Dias asks her to at least teach him how to grow things in pots, and Mol agrees without hesitation. Pulling out a fertilizer stone, she instructs him to crush it together with bone and mix it into the soil, though she clarifies this method only works for herbs, not vegetables. Dias asks what the difference is, and Mol admits she doesn't actually know, though she assumes the forest people would. Dias asks who they are, and Mol explains they're a people who live in the forest and know everything there is to know about plants and gardens. Rumor even has it that they can wave their hand and turn a barren wasteland green instantly, though she can't confirm if that's true since it's just hearsay. She promises the Oni will help with the garden however they can, but in exchange, she hopes Dias will teach them his methods if things go well. Dias agrees without any issue since that was his intention all along. Mol is delighted to hear this, saying she expects great things from him, and of course, she also expects him to have children with Alna soon. A bit sudden, honestly. Dias turns pale hearing this, especially when the elder offers to give him some herbs that might help. Later, Dias returns home and is greeted by the twins who ask what he's carrying. He proudly shows them the stones, but the girls look disappointed, assuming they're just plain rocks, and wander off to go play with the bee instead. Alna then shows up asking about the rocks. Dias picks one out, saying that to him they look like beautiful gems. Alna figures that makes sense since he can't sense mana. Anyone who can use magic would immediately see that these stones have nothing special about them. Curious, Dias asks if Sanai can sense it too. Alna confirms she can, revealing that the twins can actually perceive mana even she sometimes can't, and she's convinced they'll grow up to become even more powerful mages than the tribe's leader. Cutting to later, Dias is busy crushing fertilizer stones when Alna arrives, warning that something is approaching from the east. Dias goes to check it out, with Alna tagging along as usual. Once they reach a good vantage point, Dias pulls out his spyglass and spots Camelot's Elden's servant along with white creatures trailing behind him. Alna realizes the odd reaction was simply due to the white Gi traveling with him. She also notices something moving inside the wagon, so they decide to ask about it once they arrive. Peering into the wagon, we find several small rodents. One of them sits quietly, thinking about how lucky he was to escape the hunters, since now he can finally return to the desert. Another rodent snaps at him, saying he's wrong. In reality, they're heading straight toward the Dragon Slayer to kill him and restore honor and pride to the desert people. Hearing this, the first rodent tries to talk some sense into him, reminding him that this man single-handedly killed a dragon. The others dismiss this as nonsense, insisting it must be a dirty lie, so now they plan to defeat him and force him to provide food and transportation back to the desert. After all, this was the exact plan given to them by that hooded man. Yeah, these guys probably aren't going to live very long. Camelot brings the wagon to a stop and steps down to greet Dias and Alna, explaining he's brought the goods Lord Elden promised them. Inside the wagon, the rats spot Dias and prepare to attack. The good rat begs them not to. Just then, Dias is about to ask something when he hears a thud from inside the wagon. And as he leans in to look, the little creatures suddenly leap out and attack him. Alna immediately strikes each one down with a stick, careful not to kill them since they might belong to Camelots. The rats, however, snap back that they belong to no one, hurling insults and demanding respect for the desert people. Dias strikes them with his axe for daring to insult Alna, which makes her blush. Camelots quickly orders his guards to protect Dias and Alna and capture the rats. After a short chase, they're caught and stuffed into a sack. Camelot apologizes for the commotion, explaining that these creatures are actually subjects of his domain. Despite appearances, they're beastmen since they possess culture and the ability to speak. They too count as semi-humans. This reminds Dias of something he was taught as a child. That speech is a gift of wisdom granted by the gods, which is why only people are capable of it. The rats are known as the Judah leaping mice, though they themselves prefer to be called the desert people, since they live far from the kingdom out in the desert. As it turns out, they've been captured and sold into slavery, and Elden had promised to send them home once he secured enough authority. But the creatures apparently told him where he could shove that promise. Learning all this, Dias accepts Camelots' apology and looks over the list of goods Elden sent, along with farming tools. There are spices and various products from his domain, and he's even offering to leave behind the wagon and horses so trade can continue, plus materials for a stable that his guards will help build, and all of it completely free of charge. Dias can't help but feel indebted, so he decides to send back some dragon materials as thanks. Alna asks if they're really being given the horses as a gift, and Dias confirms it. Alna immediately runs over to pet them, then rushes back to hug Dias, telling him he's the best husband ever. That evening, on the way home, Alna tells Dias that her family was never wealthy. So as a child, she'd always dreamed of having a family that owned horses. Now that she finally has that, she's overjoyed. Dias asks if there was a specific reason her family struggled financially, and Alna admits it's because her older brother is completely useless. Setting that aside, she apologizes to Diaz for her earlier reaction, asking if he's upset about how she handled things. Diaz reassures her that when it's her doing the fighting, he has no complaints, though he'd prefer she hold back a little when there are people around. The next morning, Diaz and Klaus get to work plowing the field. After an exhausting session, they finally finish preparing the soil and sit down to rest with the elderly women while chatting. One of the elders mentions that back in her village, they used to use ash to prepare the soil, and hopes the fertilizer stones will be enough on their own. Another elder suggests digging a cistern, so they'll have water on hand in case the stream dries up during summer. Diaz and Klaus agree to take this on, since between the two of them, they have plenty of relevant experience from the war. The twins show up asking if the garden is finished yet. Diaz tells them it'll still take a few more days, then asks if they need anything. The girls report that food is ready and that Alna is calling for him. Diaz thanks them warmly, though his gaze keeps drifting back toward the garden. On the walk home, the girls ask if having a garden is difficult. Diaz says not really. Then one of them asks if he'd be sad if the garden ends up failing. He tells them not at all, since he's really just experimenting at this point. As a final question, they ask if he'd be upset if they were keeping a secret from him. He answers that he would, if it were something bad, but otherwise he has no problem with them keeping secrets. Hearing this, the girls seem visibly relieved and jump down from his arms, running off toward home. That night, Diaz asks Alna if she knows anything related to the girls' strange questions, but she claims she has no idea what he's talking about. A few days pass, and the twins go back to acting like themselves. So Diaz lets the matter go. Now able to plant seeds, they sow a fast-growing medicinal herb called yamoshi, which sprouts just a single day after planting. Once it's in the ground, Diaz is impressed to see the stable finished in just 3 days. Kamelotz explains that the pieces were already prefabricated, so his men just had to assemble them. Even though Eldan insisted everything was free, Diaz obviously couldn't just accept that without giving something back. So he packs up some crates of dragon materials for them, which terrifies everyone since they don't feel worthy of such a gift, and even suspect he might be up to something. The next day, Diaz manages to convince them to take the crates, though instead of framing it as a gift, he tells them it's just something he needs them to hold on to for a while. The twins cry as they watch the group leave, but Alna cheers them up by sending them off to feed the horses. Meanwhile, Diaz goes to check on the garden, only to find the plants have all withered and dried out. He figures the soil just needs more time, so he tries again the next day. But the plants dried out once more. He adds even more fertilizer stone, but the same result follows. Alna gently tells him to let it go and rest, reminding him it's simply impossible to grow anything on these plains. Accepting this, Diaz gets up and moves on to other tasks. But upon hearing this, the twins express a desire to help Diaz somehow, though they aren't sure how until they hear a voice calling for help. And there among the crates, they find the good rat who appears to have been trapped inside for at least a week.